Okay, so the next board is kind of like a danger board. It's a board texture which is really a really kind of tricky board to play. It's a board where both players have so many nuts in their range. They have, two pairs, sets, straights. They're gonna have top and bottom pair, pair plus draw, pair plus gut shot, pair plus backdoor flush draw. Aces isn't going to be the nuts often here, especially the deeper you are. Aces is definitely not the nuts. And as we can just see here, just through these three diagrams, we can see that 100 big blinds deep aces and kings checking very often, 40 big blinds deep aces and kings checking very often, but at 15 big blinds deep aces and kings now becomes a nut. So that's something straight away we can just see is that, the aces and kings in a part of our range isn't really the nuts anymore in this kind of board texture, the deeper we are, especially. But yeah, let's do the normal way we do it. So 100 big blinds deep, we can see here that we are doing lots of checking around 60% of the time. There's no real small betting going on, and there's no real large betting going on. Simply the reason why there's not much small betting going on is because we're betting somewhat of a polarized range. We're not really betting the kind of strong medium part of our range. Our hands like ace king, our hands like ace queen, our hands like second pair, our hands like third pair. Often when we put these hands into a checking range, our bet sizing increases because we're betting hands which have really good equity, or we're betting bluffs. So we're betting our strong top pairs, we're betting some of our over pairs, we're betting our straights. All of these hands typically are going to be hands which want to put lots of money in, whereas our bottom pairs, our medium pairs, our ace kings, our ace queens, our king queens, if we are going to include these in a betting range, often what happens is we start having a smaller sizing. But because we've eliminated a bunch of these hands, we start using the larger sizing. So if we look here, this is going to be 100 big blinds deep. We can see ace king checking, ace queen checking, king queen checking, even hands like ace 10, ace jack are checking. And lots of the hands which are betting here at high frequency are going to be hands which have really good equity. So a pair plus a straight draw, an over pair plus a straight draw, a straight, an over, two overcards, a backdoor flush draw, and a straight draw. All that kind of stuff wants to bet very often. A set, a set, a set, a straight. So lots of hands which really want to put a lot of money in. A straight here at 10-6. Even a hand like Jack 6 is a hand which we can hit a 10 for a straight to the Jack, or we can hit a 5 and hit a straight. So even this is an open-ended straight draw. So we have lots of hands which have really good equity, which want to start putting some money in. And then we have some hands which don't really want to start betting. And lots of our hands, like even a hand like 5-3, which is the bottom of our range and is a gut shot, doesn't really want to start betting because our opponent's just going to connect so heavily around the 9, 10, and 8 because pre-flop, we're going to see when we look at the ranges here that out of position doesn't have so much of that offsuit high cards like king, queen off, ace jack off, ace king off. He doesn't have these in his range. And he doesn't have the bottom of his range here either, like the deuce X off, the free X off. So he's so concentrated around the middle part of the board which means that we're just not incentivized to use too much small size in ourselves because we're not incentivized to bet the bottom of our range. We're not incentivized to bet this part of our range. So we just essentially are going to start betting a medium size. And we are typically going to bet hands which can call a raise. Or hands which are quite good bluffs for later streets. So a hand like king 3 suited is a good hand to bluff because we can make some ace highs fold now. We're going to make ace 4s, ace 3s, ace 2s, probably not ace 5s fold. Then on turns and rivers, we're going to have an overcard, which we're going to be able to bluff against, let's say, a 7 or an 8. We're going to be able to turn backdoor flush draws, stuff like this. So yeah, when we go for a bet on the flop for the half pot and face a raise, we're going to see that we're going to call a lot. So all of this middle portion of our range, which was betting, which has equity, anything which has equity is going to be continuing versus raise. And we can see that our bluffs are coming from this part here, which has an overcard and some backdoor equity, and then some hands here which have overcards and equity too. So this is kind of a nice way to visualize it. What's very interesting here is that there's not a single bluff in our range which folds now, which bet full frequency on the flop. So even a hand like king 4 suited, which wants to bet on the flop and is going to be one of our bluffs, even this hand is not bet at full frequency, right? So if we go back to the range here, we can see there's no bluffs in our range which wants to bet full frequency. And when we see this is going to be very indicative to us and a very telling story that we don't really want to bluff this board very often. We're not really incentivized to start blasting and bluffing with many hands which don't have much equity. Whereas on some other board textures, lots of our bluffs will just bluff 100% of the time. So this is going to be a really good way to look at it, 100 big blinds deep. Looking at the takeaways here, we can see that our opponent connects a lot There's a lot of natural aggression from our opponent. We only really want to bet if we're comfortable continuing, if we have equity, and we're using a medium size because our frequency is not very high, and we have lots of hands which are naturally going into our checking range, like an 8, like a 7, like even some top pairs, like some over pairs as well. So we're betting a very polarized range here. Even a hand like King 9 isn't going into the betting range. So yeah, I think this is pretty telling that we play very, very, very cautiously, very polarized, and if we bet with a hand with equity, we always want to continue. So we're going to choose hands which are very easy continues, like 10-8, like 10-9, rather than a hand like King 9 or Queen 9. So I think this is pretty good way to look at it. Moving on to 40 big blinds, I'm just going to pull it up. So this is now 40 big blinds, and when we compare 40 big blinds with 100 big blinds, there's one real big difference now, that we go from betting basically medium only at 100 big blinds, and now we start using a smaller sizing. So the reason why we use a smaller sizing is because when we are 40 big blinds deep, this is what can happen when we bet big. We bet big and they raise. We call, and the turn comes, let's say, free. The SPR on the turn now, when they check raise off 40 big blinds versus a large sizing, is going to be 1 always. This is naturally at 40 big blinds deep, or 35 big blinds deep, or 50 big blinds deep. If you use a large sizing and your opponent check raises, then they're very often going to play shoves on the turn, or be able to play shoves on the turn. So we can see here that on a blank turn, for example, our opponent's going to shove the turn very often, and when he shoves the turn, we start having to just fold so many hands with equity, like Jack 8 suited, which is a pair and a straight draw, like hands like Queen 10, which is going to be overcards and straight draws, King 10, hands with loads of equity. So because of this, we don't really want to be put into the situation where we're folding so much equity on the turn. So what we do instead is go for the small sizing. Our opponent now raises smaller, of course, and then we go for a call. And when the turns are free, for example, now our opponent can shove less often, and what he ends up doing is having to bet like third pot or smaller, which I think is a really good way to look at it, is that essentially at 40 big blinds deep, we want to be playing the same strategy, but what we just start doing is including more smaller bets with hands which really don't want to get shoved in on the turn, because we don't want to face a turn shove. So this is going to be a big difference between 100 big blinds and 40 big blinds. And we can kind of use this mechanic down the streets as well, that or in other kind of spots where if we are at a stack size where if we get check raised, are they going to shove often on the turn? That should be a big question. If we get check raised now, are they going to have a lot of shoves on the turn? And I think on this kind of board texture, it's very natural for our opponent to shove a lot when the SPR becomes close to 1, and they're going to want to do that. Whereas if the board is, let's say, 7-7 deuce, and they go for a check raise, they're not going to shove the turn on, say, 7-7 deuce jack, because their 7x isn't incentivized to fast play. Their 7x is encouraged or incentivized to just put another small bet in. Their draws are not encouraged to shove all in because they don't have much equity. On 7-7-2 jack, their shoving range, like what's it going to be? It's going to be like a deuce, which is not really incentivized to shove either. Whereas on 9-8-7-4, they're incentivized to shove their, say, Queen 10s, their King 10s. They're incentivized to shove their 2 pairs because they're more vulnerable. So this is going to be the biggest difference going from 100 big blinds to 40 big blinds. And this is kind of how I like to look at it and how I've learned through experience of going from 100 big blinds to 40 big blinds. So we can see here that same strategy but a higher frequency. We use a smaller size in 2 because out of position can now shove some turns, which I think is exactly what I've just kind of said. So yeah, let's move on to 15 big blinds. Okay, so last but not least, we're going to look at playing 15 big blinds deep. So 15 big blinds deep, we can see here there's a big difference going on. The main big difference here is that we start wanting to have some big bets or some shoves. We're only going to have 130 in our stacks here, and the pot is going to be 50. So the SPR is 2. So even if we use, like a big size in here or a big size in here, a large size is typically going to be often committing us to the pot. So we can see there's some hands which really want to shove. Some of the hands which want to shove are going to be ace 9, king 9, pocket kings, pocket aces, pocket jacks. And the reason why is because when we shove, our opponent is forced to call all in because we're too shallow. So when we go all in for 130, our opponent is going to have to call any 9, essentially. Every 9 just stacks off. So when we have ace 9 ourselves, we want to make sure he doesn't get away from his hand. Any 7 or most 7s with stuff going on is stacking off. Most 8x is stacking off. Even the hands like queen 10, king 10, these are stacking off. Ace 8, hands like this are stacking off because we have so many hands which are just drawing in our range and they're just going to have enough equity. So yeah, we start having we start having some shoves ourselves here. Ace 9, King 9, Jack 9, 10 9, aces, kings. We're incentivized to fast play because our opponent just has to call off because he's going to have a bunch of equity so often. So, yeah, the main difference here is that we incorporate some more shoves. And also here is that some of our hands which we're checking earlier, so hands like ace 9, king 9, queen 9, jack 9, they were checking because they didn't really want to stack off 100 big blinds. What happens now is that these hands start betting at a lot higher frequency. So what ends up happening here is our check-in frequency decreases and we just start betting our top pairs more often for value. So we're still checking our 8x, we're still checking our 7x, but our 9x plays a lot more aggressively the shallower we are, because if we get quote unquote coolered, it doesn't matter because we're only 15 big blinds deep and we can get it in against a lot worse hands. At 100 big blinds deep, if we get it in, we're never getting it in against a worse hand. But at 15 big blinds deep, we're going to get it in really, really good, really, really often. So that's going to be the main difference here between 15 big blinds and 100 big blinds, is we're not incentivized to slow play or to trap or to kind of worry about our top pairs. Our top pairs just fast play so often. Again, you can see all of the top pairs here are also going very aggressively. We played a little bit more passive with some of our draws. So you can see here, these hands all betting 100% frequency, the queen tens, the queen jacks, the king jacks, stuff like that. Now at 15 big blinds deep, these hands don't really want to go for a bet, because if they bet and our opponent shoves, they can't really call off. Whereas at 100 big blinds deep, if they bet and our opponent raises, they can always call a raise because they have a draw to the high straight, right? So at 100 big blinds deep, you want to bet your draws quite aggressively because you can always call a raise. But the shallower you are, it kind of flips around. We don't want to bet our draws as often, because if we can't call a shove, we start folding so much equity, or hands which have pretty good equity. So our strategy is kind of flipped around. We don't bet our top pairs and we bet our draws at 100 big blinds deep because we can continue, and we want to play hands which can have the nuts for 100 big blinds. At 15 big blinds, effectively the nuts is top pair, and we don't want to bet fold hands which have really good equity. So yeah, I think this is going to be a pretty good way to look at it. Our queen jacks, our king jacks, our king queens, hands like this, queen jack offsuit, etc. These hands are all going to really start to slow play on the flop. Not slow play, just like not fast play on the flop. And our pairs are going to be playing faster. So this is going to be the danger board of 987 Rainbow versus the big blind. And hopefully you can see, it's really important to analyze the spot from deep stack, mid stack, shallow stack, and see how the strategy shifts based on what the SPR is. So hopefully this has been very helpful, and going to end this one now.